The tenant farmer's plow struck something solid in the Delaware soil. He stopped his horse and bent down to check. What he pulled from the earth wasn't a rock or some broken farming tool. It was a small human skull. The farmer dropped it at once and stepped back. His hands shook as he looked around the ground. More bones were scattered in the dirt. He counted them quietly. One skeleton, then another, then a third. The smallest bones belonged to a child, maybe 5 years old. This was April of 1829, on land owned by a woman named Patty Cannon. She lived just a few miles away with her daughter and son-in-law. The farmer ran off to tell the authorities. He had no idea he had just uncovered one of America's most shocking family crime operations. 4 bodies buried in a field, all of them black, all of them murdered. But this wasn't just the work of one killer. This was a whole family that had turned kidnapping and murder into a business. For more than a decade, they worked together. Mother, daughter, and son-in-law. They killed together, buried bodies together, and counted money together. The authorities would soon discover that 4 bodies were only the beginning. This was one of the most haunting crimes in history. Patty Cannon was born around 1760, though no one knows her exact birth date. Some records suggest her real name was Lucretia Patricia Hanley. She grew up during the Revolutionary War, when times were tough for most families. Money was scarce and survival meant doing whatever it took. Patty married a local farmer named Jesse Cannon. They settled near what is now Reliance, Delaware, right on the border with Maryland. That location would become critical to their crimes. If police came searching in one state, they could simply walk across the line to the other. Patty and Jesse had at least one daughter together. Jesse died around 1826, leaving Patty to manage things on her own. But she wasn't alone for long. Her daughter had married twice, and both husbands were criminals. The first, Henry Brighton, was a blacksmith. He kidnapped free black people and sold them into slavery. He was caught and jailed in 1811 but escaped. Authorities caught him again and hanged him for murder. After Brayton's death, Patty's daughter married Joe Johnson. Johnson ran a tavern a few miles from Patty's house. He would become her most important partner in crime. Together they built what people called the Reverse Underground Railroad. While the real Underground Railroad helped slaves escape to freedom, the Cannon-Johnson gang did the opposite. They kidnapped free black people and sold them back into slavery. By 1829, this family operation had been running for over 10 years. They had kidnapped hundreds of people, killing anyone who stood in their way. The family worked as a unit. Patty provided the house where victims were hidden. Johnson provided the tavern and the boats for transportation. Patty's daughter helped manage the captives and enjoyed watching her husband beat them. They recruited other criminals too, some white, some black, some mixed race. The black accomplices were especially useful because they could approach free black people without raising suspicion. One key member was John Purnell, a mixed-race man who used several fake names. He worked as a decoy to lure young black men onto their boats. Another member, Henry Carr, helped with kidnappings and transportation. The gang even included Robert Brighton, a relative of Patty's first son-in-law. Crime seemed to run through all the families involved. What made this case especially disturbing wasn't just the kidnappings. It was the casual way they murdered anyone who became inconvenient. Children who cried too much, adults who insisted they were free, witnesses who knew too much. The Cannon family killed them all, and they buried the bodies on their own land. The Cannon-Johnson gang thrived in a perfect storm of historical circumstances. In 1807, Congress banned the import of new slaves from Africa. At the same time, cotton farming exploded in the Deep South. The cotton gin made short staple cotton profitable, and plantation owners needed more labor than ever. Demand for slaves skyrocketed. Prices soared, with a single slave selling for thousands of dollars. Meanwhile, thousands of free black people lived in Maryland, Delaware, and nearby Philadelphia. Many had been freed after the Revolutionary War, and others were born free to mixed-race families. Philadelphia had the largest free black population in the North, but with no professional police force, it was an easy hunting ground for kidnappers. The Cannon gang took advantage of all this. They kidnapped free people in the North and sold them for huge profits in the South. Local white communities usually didn't care what happened to black people. Even when families reported missing relatives, authorities rarely investigated. Their methods were carefully planned. They would approach free black people, especially young men near the waterfront. They offered work on boats or promised jobs. Once the victims were isolated, the gang overpowered them. Chains and ropes bound the captives. Victims were hidden in secret rooms in Patty's house, some in the basement, others locked in the attic. Joe Johnson kept them in leg irons. If anyone insisted they were free, he whipped them viciously. His goal was to break their spirit before selling them. Patty's daughter, shockingly, enjoyed watching the beatings. She was even overheard saying, "It did her good to see him beat the boys." The gang operated like this for years without serious consequences. Local law enforcement either feared them or didn't care about their victims. If authorities did come looking, Patty simply crossed state lines. Maryland and Delaware police couldn't follow her. But by the mid-1820s, things started changing. Philadelphia elected Joseph Watson as mayor. Watson, a Quaker, actually cared about helping kidnapped black people. He began working with Pennsylvania's governor, John Andrew Schulze. Together, they launched real efforts to rescue victims and prosecute the gang. In 1825 and 1826, Watson and Schulze successfully retrieved many young people kidnapped and sold to Mississippi plantations. They paid for legal papers and even sent white witnesses to Alabama to verify identities. For the first time, the gang began to feel pressure. Some members were arrested and tried, but most prosecutions failed. In 1822, Joe Johnson was sentenced to a public punishment, 39 lashes. He endured it, survived, and went right back to crime. John Purnell was tried twice. First, he was acquitted in Mayor's Court, but in 1827, he was convicted in Philadelphia County Court on 2 counts of kidnapping. His punishment was a $4,000 fine and 42 years in prison. He died in jail 5 years later. Henry Carr was also tried but acquitted. He fled to Alabama and died there in 1828. But Patty Cannon herself had never faced real consequences. She kept running her operation from her Delaware property. As the pressure grew, the gang grew more desperate and violent. Anyone who threatened them was eliminated. Exact details of every murder are lost to time, but witness testimony and Patty's own confessions revealed enough. One key witness was Cyrus James, a mixed-race man enslaved to Patty since age 7. He grew up in her household and participated in many crimes. James later testified that he once saw Patty carrying an injured black child in her apron. The child never came back. James acted as a decoy for the gang, and because of his background, free black people trusted him more than strangers. But he also saw the murders. He knew where bodies were buried. In the end, his testimony helped convict Patty. The gang killed for many reasons. Children were killed for crying too much during transport. Adults were killed if they refused to stop saying they were free. Defiant captives were worth less money, so the gang preferred to sell those who acted submissive. Witnesses who saw too much were killed to prevent exposure. Patty's land was perfect for hiding bodies. It was rural, isolated, and spacious. The murders weren't random. They were calculated business moves. Each death removed a threat to the gang's profits. But Patty made one fatal mistake. She buried all the bodies on her own property. That evidence would destroy her. In April 1829, a tenant farmer plowing Patty's field struck the first skull. Digging further, he found more bones. He immediately contacted local authorities. Sussex County officials investigated carefully. They uncovered 4 full skeletons, 3 children and 1 adult male. Based on skull measurements and physical evidence, all were determined to be black. The discovery horrified the local community. People already knew Patty was involved in shady activities, but multiple murders on her property shocked everyone. Delaware authorities wasted no time. They got a warrant for Patty's arrest and gathered evidence. Cyrus James, the man who had grown up in her house, became their star witness. He gave detailed testimony about the murders and how the gang operated. Other witnesses stepped forward too. Some were escaped or rescued victims. Others were neighbors who had noticed suspicious things. The evidence piled up. Authorities were sure they could finally convict Patty Cannon. But first, they had to find her. When news of the discovery spread, Patty disappeared. Delaware authorities launched a manhunt. They believed she was hiding near the Maryland-Delaware border. Meanwhile, investigators examined the crime scene, and medical professionals studied the bodies. Based on decomposition, they determined the murders had taken place years apart. An infant had been killed on April 26, 1822. A male child the same day. An adult male on October 1, 1820. A young boy on June 1, 1824. These dates matched witness reports of when certain people vanished. Cyrus James delivered the most damning testimony. He described how Patty killed victims without emotion when they became inconvenient. Other witnesses explained the gang's kidnapping tricks, hiding places, and transport routes. The investigation revealed her crimes went far beyond the 4 murders. For over a decade, hundreds of free black people had been kidnapped and sold. Most were never seen again. But the 4 victims buried on her property gave Delaware authorities the evidence they needed. After weeks of searching, they caught Patty Cannon. She was arrested and taken to Georgetown, Delaware to face charges. In April 1829, a grand jury of 24 white men indicted her on 4 counts of murder. Delaware's Attorney General signed the charges. She was accused of murdering an infant girl, a boy, an adult man, and a young black boy between 1820 and 1824. Patty was held in the Sussex County Jail while awaiting trial. The case drew huge attention across Delaware and beyond. People were stunned by the thought of a woman leading such a brutal criminal ring. Female killers were rare in the 1820s. Others were intrigued by her reverse underground railroad, which stood in stark contrast to the real one. But Patty would never see trial. On May 11, 1829, Patty was found dead in her cell. She was between 60 and 70 years old. Before her death, she confessed to nearly 24 murders, far more than the 4 bodies unearthed. Accounts differ on how she died. Some say she poisoned herself to avoid hanging. Others claim natural causes. A later novel, The Entailed Hat, dramatized her death by poison, but that was fiction. What's certain is that Patty died before justice could be served. Her victims' families never saw her punished. Her death ended the most notorious kidnapping gang in American history, but it didn't erase the damage. Hundreds of free black people had been stolen and sold into slavery. Most were never saved or reunited with family. Only John Purnell served real prison time. Joe Johnson, Patty's son-in-law and main partner, never faced serious punishment for murder. He only received lashes for earlier kidnappings. Patty's daughter, who had enjoyed watching the beatings, was never charged. The case exposed the harsh truth of systemic racism in 1820s America. Free black people had almost no protection. Authorities usually ignored them. This wasn't just about bad people. It was about a system that devalued black lives. The gang thrived because of it. The Cannon Gang's crimes became folklore. Books and articles were written for decades, though many blurred fact and fiction. Patty became almost mythical, painted as clever or glamorous. In reality, she was simply ruthless, a woman who turned murder and kidnapping into a family business. Delaware later placed a historical marker in Seaford honoring the victims. But most victims have no memorials. Their names are lost forever. Patty's body was buried in the Georgetown jail graveyard. Later, when the land was redeveloped, her remains were moved to a potter's field. Oddly, her skull was separated from the rest. It was displayed in different places over the years. In 1961, it was shown at the Dover Public Library. In 2010, it was loaned to the Smithsonian for study. Even in death, Patty remained a grim curiosity. But the real story wasn't about one evil woman. It was about a family that chose profit over life. Patty's daughter actively participated. Joe Johnson was just as guilty. They brought in relatives and partners, making crime a family trade. Most disturbing of all, they got away with it for over a decade. Not because they were geniuses, but because systemic racism let them. Authorities often knew what was happening but did nothing when the victims were black. It took bodies found on Patty's own land to finally bring consequences. And even then, she escaped justice by dying first. This case shows that not all families protect each other. Sometimes they destroy each other. When parents teach children that human lives don't matter, the results are devastating. Sometimes the ones who claim family first are the ones who corrupt it from within.